Hello and welcome to this discussion on retail for Christie Co's Business Outlook. I'm joined today by Micheal O'Loughlin, good friend of Christie Co and client, and he's very well qualified to talk about the retail industry, being a non-executive director of a number of companies, including suppliers and retailers. So welcome, Micheal. Good to see you. Thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thanks, Steve. Really great to be here today.
So the tone for 2023 was very much set by 2022 and all the economic problems that followed after that. But despite that, we saw some really exciting deals happening. Micheal's in administration went to Morrison's. The co-op sold 130 petrol stations into Asda. Asda has acquired the majority of EG's property portfolio. And MFG sold quite a lot of sites into the independent market. It's been fairly positive from my perspective, but how have the economic pressures affected the clients that you're seeing?
Well, I suppose the government have been behind most of those. The inflation issues has been a big problem for retail convenience. Trying to pass on inflation on products has been a real challenge because, if you're not up 10% like for like, well then you're down. So that's been a real problem for people. And you have to combine it with this relentless increase in minimum wage. We have a minimum wage now of £11.44 from this April. So it's been a very challenging year. Energy prices still have played a part of that. I still don't think anybody knows what a good energy deal looks like these days. Inflation is going to be around next year, and I was at an ACS event recently, and it was announced that this minimum wage was going to come in at £11.44, and the retailer said that in 2024, in April, we have to pay for this, and that's over £2,000 per employee. And what's going to happen is we've got to put up prices again.
So do you think, from our perspective, you might see an impact on transactional volumes because of that negativity? Or do you think that there'll just be a price adjustment, we'll see prices go up, so that will feed through to profits on accounts, and then we just carry on again?
Yeah, well, there's always a delay with these things. So employers are struggling to honour all of these pay increases because they're having the same battle of trying to pass those increases onto their customers. And be it retail customers or be it corporate customers, we all have that challenge. So there's always going to be delay. And as a result of the delays, we have disruption because employees and unions are not happy because we're not passing on the increases at the rate they are. But unfortunately, that's the position of the market, and the market always behaves like this.
What's really interesting to me is that there's no shortage of people wanting to get into the convenience industry. We have no shortage of new buyers registering to own their own business. We are a nation of shopkeepers after all. So there's obviously a lot of positivity around the marketplace. Do you see that as being something that will bolster the numbers of buyers and therefore pure supply and demand dictates that there'll be more deals? Well,
the ACS will tell us that I think it's 40,000 convenience stores in the UK. I think that encompasses the 8,500 forecourt shops. So we've about 40,000. Aldi and Lidl, big disruptors. They've been disrupting our market since 2010. I think in 2024, they're going to reach somewhere near 20% of market share. If you go back as far as 2006, they were pretty much 2 or 3%, so they weren't relevant at all. So the great British public will be spending, very soon they'll be spending £1 in £5 in an Aldi or a Lidl. And there's lots of other discounters in the space as well. So I think we're getting to the point where we have enough convenience stores. I think the quality of our convenience stores is a problem. And I think a lot of the groups that you would represent and deal with are rationalising their estate. They're looking at, I suppose they're entering a period after COVID where they went, I want more convenience stores. And a lot of these groups grew at massive rates trying to a land grab of convenience stores in very obscene and strange locations. And a lot of those haven't worked. So I think we're having a retrenching now. And then we look at what Morrison's and Asda, they have come out, their open policy is, we want small stores. Now, Morrison's tried that a number of years ago, as we know, and they retrenched very quickly. It didn't work for them. But they're going again, and that's under their private equity ownership. They want to be in local community stores. Asda have taken the same approach under the EG brothers. They knew the value of being in those local locations. So they're also going after these locations. And these strategies sometimes will take 1 year or 5 years or 10 years, but the strategy will slowly affect our high streets. And where our independent retailers are operating at the moment, they're going to be soon very, very cozy with bigger brands. The Tesco's led the way there and showed us that a consumer can get really good local goods in a local small store. And Morrison's and Asda are going to follow suit. How do you see consumer behaviour changing? Because if the
Major grocers are coming in with quite aggressive expansion plans. That's going to mean something for the independents that are out there already and have already got stores. So is there something that independents can do to tap into changing consumer behaviour?
Well, the consumer is going through a period of disarray, I would say. It's very hard to know what to trust anymore. As I said, I mentioned Morrisons and Asda. Morrison and Asda traditionally were the UK discounters. And I think they've lost their identity. And I think they know they've lost their identity because the new UK discounters are Aldi and Lidl. So these organisations, the consumer is changing their habits. And as I say, £1 in £5 is being spent with these German discounters. Who would have thought? So the consumer is being challenged on shopping smaller amounts. They're not doing the big shop anymore. So the big box retailing is maybe not as relevant. And a lot of the big box companies in the UK are struggling with those boxes. We saw Wilko in 2023. And that will continue. And that's a trend that's happened all the way through the last decade. Woolworths went a number of years ago. So this is continuing to happen. Can it happen to one of our big four supermarkets? Well, potentially it can. What is safe anymore? So Aldi are promoting that they'll open 100 stores a year. Lidl are coming out with similar rhetoric, but in 2023, Aldi managed to open 50. And I think a lot of that was down to the great British planning system, which blocks an awful lot of progress, as we know. So I think they will catch up on that. Aldi didn't get to a significant number. I think they were about 15 new stores. But when you're opening 65 stores in 2023 between those two discounters and potentially more in 2024, well, then you're dealing with a situation that something has to give. More retail locations are opening up, and these are superstores. These are stores doing large volumes, and that will affect communities. And of course, independent retailers that we know tell us how much they're impacted when an Aldi or Lidl come into that geography. So we can't underestimate the domino effect of the disruption of the last decade and the next decade, and what's going to happen because of these supermarkets and what way they're behaving.
And is there a place somewhere in that mix going forward for petrol filling stations? Obviously, they're a little bit under attack from the press telling us all that we're going to be driving EVs, electric vehicles, fairly soon. Where do they fit into the scheme of things moving ahead?
Well, we've seen fuel margins. So fuel margins, we could never, when I was operating all the petrol station groups I operated, we could never mention fuel margins. But fuel margins in 2008 were 4 pence per litre. We're probably settling at around 15 pence at the moment. So the market has completely changed. The great British consumer and the motorist is paying a lot more for their fuel. And that's generally to do with Morrisons and Asda becoming owned by American private equity funds. The forecourt operators have never had it as good. But the uncertainty is, when is this going to stop? And of course, this government was the first Conservative government to get involved in industry. And that was maybe pressure from the Labour government at the time saying that the forecourt retailers were ripping off the UK consumer.
So what we're saying is that extra margin is probably paying for the increased costs that have come through the industry over the last 10, 15 years.
Absolutely. Energy costs have gone up. So we've 34 million cars in the UK. We've 6 million commercial vehicles. So we've 40 million vehicles on the road in the UK. In 2024, in early 2024, we'll finally reach 1 million battery electric vehicles in the UK. So we haven't been very good at it. And then Rishi Sunak has changed government policy to suggest to the UK public, well, you don't actually even have to buy one until 2035. Over the last 20 years, the UK public only buys 2.15 million cars per year. So even if we all tomorrow started to buy electric vehicles, it would still take 17 years for us all to convert to electric vehicles. And in reality, in 2023, only 16% of those cars were battery electric. So the panic and the stress around battery electric is really, it's made up by the media and people who want change. And of course, debt markets want to invest in change because that's where they see, and energy is always attractive. So they will want to invest in electric vehicles. But Boris Johnson in 2020, during the pandemic, said to the car industry, the UK is going to go electric. He didn't discuss hydrogen. He didn't discuss alternative fuels. There was no document done. He had a vast majority of a government, and he passed that legislation. And the car industry did exactly what car industries do. They respond to that, and they start producing electric vehicles. We also drive on a different side of the road to Europe. So the vehicles that we have are pretty exclusive already, and now they're going to be more exclusive. So Rishi Sunak coming in and changing direction and adding 5 years on has been a huge disruption for the car industry, who, if you try and buy a car today, probably 70 or 80% of the cars they'll offer you will either be hybrid or electric. So the combustion engines are in less manufacturing at this stage. So we really haven't thought this through. And again, this is back The UK PLC, 70 million people, 40 million vehicles, is sending a message to industry. Worldwide industries produce these cars, and the message is confusing.
Do you see there being some developments around hydrogen to complement maybe what's happening with the advent of electric vehicles?
You know, we look at the UK policy during that pandemic period, and Boris came out, and again, under his government, they decided the UK was going to be an EV nation. The same time in the continent, the Germans, for instance, they were looking at alternative fuels, they were looking at hydrogen, and they looked at electric vehicles, and they brought in different policies that covered all these areas. So currently today, we don't have a UK policy for hydrogen. We don't have a UK policy for alternative fuels. There's no incentives for the oil companies to sell us these things. So we're on one track at the moment. So really, if you look at the humorous side of this, we're going to be in a number of years' time, loads of German tourists are going to arrive into Dover in hydrogen cars, and we'll have nowhere to fill them.
I suppose on the wider sustainability point, though, there's quite a lot around that in terms of how operators are starting to address, you know, getting to net zero by 2050, which is what the government's aiming for. You know, it's debatable as to whether that's achievable or not, but what kind of practical things are you seeing coming into retailers or indeed suppliers to try and achieve, you know, sustainable goals?
You'd have to forgive industry for not being hugely focused on sustainability. We've had a fierce period of disruption. We've had the pandemic, we have the Ukrainian war, we've had the war in the Middle East, we've had the COVID pandemic. We've had lots of challenges for us to deal with. And the challenge for most businesses is staying relative and staying in business. And that's been and passing on all those increases of inflation and managing your energy costs and managing the disruptive period that we've gone through. And this government hasn't promoted its own social issues in relation to sustainability. They've moved every guideline. They've pushed everything back. So industry is looking and saying, well, this government certainly hasn't got a green agenda. This government is not sticking to the guns of this green agenda. So really, why should we? Now, there is a corporate piece where people need to connect with their customers, and there are some green activities going on there. The reverse vending option will happen in 2024 in February for Ireland. So every time you get a plastic bottle, it'll be more expensive than it is now. So a bottle of a fizzy drink will be 15 cents in Ireland, more expensive. And then when you return that empty bottle to the shop, you will be given 15-cent voucher in most cases. So that's going to happen in October 2025 in the UK. That's a fantastic thing. I think we all drive the roads in London, and there's litter from plastic bottles lining lay-bys and hedges and parks and all these things. So they never have a value. So I'm sure there's lots of aspiring young teenagers going to be out with their plastic bag at the weekend and saying, I'm going to go collect all these plastic bottles.
So Christie Finance, our brokerage, seem to be continuing to do lots of deals in the small, medium enterprise space. No problem at all. There's no shortage of lenders that want to lend into sectors, but it seems to be a bit trickier higher up the food chain once you get to the corporate market. Is this something that you're seeing?
The UK debt market disappeared about 18 months ago or 2 years ago. They went away. They were nervous about the conditions. They were nervous, certainly in relation to that Liz Truss period where interest rates went through the roof, and everyone was scratching their heads what was going on in the UK. And I think we in the UK, we were scratching our heads, and it was inevitable that somebody like Rishi Sunak would come through. But the debt market want to come back. But the debt market is confused about what to invest in, because the UK consumer eventually and inevitably, they decide where the debt market will shop and where they'll support. So what we're seeing now is a period where the debt market are looking at everything. They're weighing up. They love energy because we all use energy. We've 70 million people in the UK on this small island. They want to feed us. So they want to look at food. They want to look at things we're doing. So the debt market is sitting in the wings, wants to come back, but doesn't know which horse to bet or to back at the moment. And that is a level of confusion. But I do think that we're on the cusp of that now. Again, 2024 being an election year brings some certainty to the debt market. But big deals have big risks. But big deals will happen again. We have seen, you and me together have seen the last 2 decades of massive deals, big restructuring of the UK convenience sector, big restructuring of the UK forecourt sector. It's still happening, and I think it's going to continue, and it's going to come back. So big deals will happen again. There's no doubt about it.
You've already got private equity involved in Morrison's, Asda with TDR. Do you see some others coming in maybe? Is there a story with Sainsbury's potentially, I don't know, or any other of the large grocers?
There's no lack of appetite. And I know that people will have looked at all of those large businesses. A lot of Europeans looking at our business. Sterling and the UK is the 5th biggest economy on the planet. You know, it's still a very attractive place to do business. We have a relatively high level of disposable income of our consumers. We see the fast food, which we haven't discussed today, the absolute explosion of fast food and coffee on the go and all these things, and the new brands coming into that space. So there's still a huge amount of activity, and I do see that continuing. I don't see any of that retrenching. I think we're on a roll now, and British people love brands. But do they love brands as much anymore since Aldi and Lidl have arrived? Because now we can fill our whole shopping basket full of brands we're not aware of. So brand is becoming less important. Or do we like different brands? Are we now switching brand? So we're in for another period of this dysfunctional change. I think it's going to happen at a huge pace. And I think, as usual, we'll be at the cutting edge of that.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because the majority of stores throughout the convenience industry, forecourts as well, is majority owned by independents. So it's a pretty fragmented ownership model. Is there an opportunity for some consolidation in there?
Well, we've 2,500 mama and papa sites in the UK, as you say. There's 2,500 or 2,000 in the big groups. The supermarkets have 1,500, I think, and the majors have 1,500. So I think there's always lots of churn there. You know, if we go into 2035, 2040, 2045, inevitably we're going to see the growth of electric vehicles. I'm not a flat earther. I realise this is going to happen, and I think when it happens, we'll be ready for that. We'll have the infrastructure ready for that. And as that happens, we will see a decrease in forecourts. But forecourts are on wonderful locations, great A roads, all have alternative use. Maybe not the same opportunity of a 15 pence per litre fuel margin, but they're very well located in the UK. They'll take to fast food, they'll take to commercial properties, they'll take to residential. So these are really wonderfully located. And the oil company majors who exited in the last decade, they were experts at positioning these in relevant locations. So I think the community is well positioned to be able to have very successful exits when the time comes.
We're seeing a lot of small multiple groups growing out of some of the disposal campaigns that we've dealt with and so on. What do you see are the challenges for those guys to make a decent level of profit in this challenging environment going forward? The minimum wage going up and inflation and energy costs and so on.
I'm often asked this question, and it relates to forecourt shops and it relates to those convenience stores that are wonderful operations and all those mini major groups that some of them I represent. The biggest challenge to us is supply chain. The supply chain currently is not where it needs to be if we're going to compete with the big four. So if the big four are coming to play in our backyard and going to be in local communities, operating 2,000 and 3,000 square foot stores, they'll have better prices at retail, they'll have better promotional activity, and they'll generally have a better range to offer to the consumer. Unless our supply chain catches up with that, well then we're not going to be able to compete on level footing. But if the supply chain catches up on that, well then we're really well positioned to put up a good fight.
And are there some suppliers that are better than others for different reasons? Maybe pricing, maybe quality of delivery, maybe fulfilment?
Well, we've seen in recent years, we've seen Tesco buy Booker, we've seen the cooperative group purchase Nisa, and Nisa have certainly put in that range. So we've seen Morrison's now, they've come into the space and Morrison's want to franchise. Sainsbury's, as you know, came in, had a look, stayed for a while and went again, but maybe Sainsbury's have been a bit confused about their own business model over the years. So what we're seeing is, we're seeing the supply chain, the willingness is there, but we run small boxes and many of your customers are small box retailers with relatively small volumes. And that's a challenge for the supply chain to give them a proper range. But it's chicken and egg. Unless they give them the better range, they can't grow into a bigger supply chain. So they need to look after these smaller retailers, but they need to deliver that. If the independent convenience store is going to remain relevant, you can't just survive on booze, fags, and impulse items. You need that fresh. You need to be able to give the consumer the confidence to be able to go there and buy an evening meal. Yeah. And most of our convenience stores struggle with that still.
One of the interesting changes that's happening over the last few years is with vaping. So obviously the government wants us to all stop smoking at some point in time, and there's been recent announcements about vaping as well. How do you see that changing the convenience sector in its widest sense? Do you think that everyone's going to suddenly stop smoking and move to vaping? Is everyone going to behave themselves in the vaping market? And what's the opportunity or otherwise in there, or the threats indeed, for some of the retailers?
Well, vaping and cigarette smoking are somewhat linked, obviously, because they're similar activities. And cigarettes has been in decline for the last 20 years. We've about 5 million smokers in the UK, so it is a declining market. A packet of cigarettes is about £15 now and rising, and continuing to rise. They say, the NHS claim that half of the people who go to the NHS every week are suffering from lifestyle-induced activities. So they eat too much, they smoke too much, they don't exercise, all these sort of things is what's happening. And obviously cigarettes is a big part of that. So then we have a situation where vaping has arrived, and vaping is very unregulated. I think it's categorized as a toy for taxation purposes, so it's clearly not a toy. There's no regulation on it. The disposable ones, it's anticipated that they will eventually be banned. And the government have announced that in 2024, they're going to put in taxation, whether that's just a VAT change or whether that's some sort of other charge, we'll wait and see. But the market needs to be regulated because there is no control, and a lot of these products are coming counterfeit from all over the planet. Nobody really knows where they're coming from, nobody knows what's in them. So, but they've caught everybody on the hop. But it's now representing 15% of sales in petrol stations. So it's now a very significant part of the market. And it definitely has an incentive to move people away from smoking. We all want to see that. The cigarette companies themselves want to promote people moving towards vape style products and away from tobacco. And the UK, it's just a win-win for everybody. But also we live on an island, and since Brexit, we've had a situation where people are, every time you go on holidays, or every time you get in a plane, and we fly a lot as a nation, you get duty-free. So there's been a huge influx of duty-free into the UK, and retailers are telling me that sales in some locations, in some challenging locations, are really dented by the duty-free and also the counterfeit cigarettes.
So for independent retailers, what's the next best thing for them to go and stock in their shops, do you think?
I'm always a fan of food to go, as you know. I think there's more opportunities in hot beverages. I think some brands have cornered the market at the moment, and the deal maybe is not great that those hot beverage companies are offering retailers. So I think there's more, and people are beginning to become more concerned about coffee, and they understand it more, and they understand more what they like. And I think there's more space for that to grow. So food service is always a good thing. There's lots of food service brands coming into the UK. It's not the traditional 2 or 3 brands which we saw in petrol and forecourt over the years. It's beginning to change a little bit, and it's for the better, because the big brands that appear to be growing in 23, 24 appear to be brands that are based on sandwiches and coffee. So we're seeing Leon grow, obviously under the ownership of Eurogarages. We're seeing Pret a Manger now franchising their offer right across the UK, and these seem to be the popular brands. McDonald's are always growing. McDonald's in the UK is the only market in Europe that's still in growth. So we eat a lot of McDonald's. But food service, and as I say, good sandwiches, good coffee, really is. It's funny, we've gone full circle of all these exotic foods, and we're back to eating really good sandwiches and really good coffee.
If we could sort of wrap up now with what your sort of 3 main predictions are for 2024, what would you say they are going to be?
Well, I think the discounters are going to keep growing, and that's a threat to everybody. So I think everyone has to accept that that's happening. The UK consumer is changing, and they're continuing to do that. Battery electric will grow. It's continuing to grow, and you have to ask yourself, if in 5 years' time we have maybe 4 or 5 million vehicles on the road, well, that's 12 or 15% of the market. And if your business loses 12 to 15% of its customers, does it remain viable? Minimum wage is continuing to rise. So the petrol station shop eventually could be there just to collect cash for fuel, because the shop is not viable anymore on that level of minimum wage. But I think the UK is a very resilient country, and I've seen so many, and even in the last 15 years, we've seen credit crunches, we've seen pandemics, wars, all those things we discussed, and yet we bounce back. The nation bounces back. It seems to be the people are very resilient at adapting to a new environment. So I think that's going to continue to happen. I think the UK will bounce back. And sterling will recover. As I say, it's a very powerful nation, and it's the 5th biggest economy on the planet, so that's going to continue.
So convenience is set fair for the time being?
I think for the next number of years, convenience is a safe place to be. Yeah.
Micheal, thanks ever so much indeed for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Steve.